The Forbes magazine trembled in my mother's hands, not from shock, but from the effort it took her not to throw it across the kitchen table at my stepfather. There I was on the cover, smiling confidently in my navy blazer, with the headline reading 30 Under 30, Tech Innovators Reshaping Digital Marketing. David Brennan sat frozen at the breakfast table, his coffee growing cold as he stared at the image of his stepdaughter who he'd dismissed as worthless just 8 years earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This can't be real, he whispered, his calloused fingers reaching for the magazine. Natalie? Our Natalie? My mother Linda pulled the magazine closer to her chest, her eyes filling with tears she'd held back for nearly a decade. Yes, David, the girl you said would end up working at the gas station for minimum wage. The one you told to stop dreaming because people like us don't make it big. She's worth $12 million now. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the familiar sounds of Cedar Falls, Ohio continued. Trucks rumbled past their modest two-story home, heading to the factories that employed most of the town. But inside that kitchen, everything had changed. The power dynamic that had defined our family for years had just shifted completely, and David Brennan was finally seeing the full scope of what his cruelty had cost him. My name is Natalie Harper, and I'm 28 years old. This is the story of how I turned 8 years of doubt, dismissal, and outright hostility into the fuel that powered my rise to the top of the tech industry. It's about proving that sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up providing the greatest motivation for our success. David Brennan entered our lives when I was 15. My biological father had died in a construction accident when I was 12, leaving my mother struggling to raise me on her waitressing income. David owned Brennan Auto Repair, a moderately successful garage on the outskirts of town. To my mother, he represented stability and security. To me, he represented the end of the close relationship I'd shared with her for 3 years. From the beginning, David made it clear that I was an inconvenience. He had a son, Tyler, from his first marriage who was 2 years older than me and worked at the garage. Tyler was everything David valued: mechanically gifted, satisfied with small-town life, and completely uninterested in anything beyond Cedar Falls. I, on the other hand, spent my free time in the library, teaching myself basic coding on their ancient computers, and dreaming of a world beyond the rusted water towers and empty storefronts of our dying industrial town. David's resentment toward me wasn't subtle. During family dinners, he'd praise Tyler's latest accomplishments at the garage while pointedly ignoring any mention of my academic achievements. When I made honor roll, he'd grunt and change the subject. When I won the regional science fair with a basic website I'd created for local businesses, he laughed and said, "Playing around on computers isn't going to pay the bills, Natalie. You need to learn some real skills." The tension came to a head during my junior year of high school. I had been accepted into a summer program for young entrepreneurs at Ohio State University, 3 hours away in Columbus. The program was free, but I needed transportation and a small amount for meals. I'd been working part-time at the local diner, but hadn't saved enough yet. When I approached David and my mother about helping with the costs, David's response was swift and crushing. "Absolutely not," he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "We're not wasting money on some fantasy camp for kids who think they're too good for honest work." My mother started to protest, but David cut her off. "Linda, she needs to understand how the world works. People like us don't become entrepreneurs or business owners. We work for people who do. The sooner Natalie accepts that, the happier she'll be." But I wasn't finished. I'd spent months researching the program, understanding exactly how it could help me develop the business plan I'd been working on in secret. "David, this program has connections to actual startup incubators in Columbus and Cleveland. Some participants have gone on to start real companies. This could change everything for our family's financial situation." That's when David stood up from the table, his face red with anger. "Change everything? You think you're going to change everything?" He laughed bitterly. "Natalie, you're a 17-year-old girl from Cedar Falls, Ohio. Your mother waits tables, and I fix cars. That's who we are. That's who you are. You will never amount to anything more than that, no matter how many computer classes you take or how many dreams you have. The best thing you can do is graduate high school, find a decent job at one of the remaining factories, and stop filling your head with ridiculous ideas." The words hit me like physical blows, but what hurt more was seeing my mother's reaction. Instead of defending me or my dreams, she simply looked down at her hands and said quietly, "Maybe David's right, honey. Maybe it's better to be realistic about these things. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying David's words over and over. You will never amount to anything. The phrase echoed in my mind, but instead of crushing my spirit, it began to transform into something else entirely. Fuel. Determination. Proof that I would need to gather for the day when I could show him exactly how wrong he was. I didn't attend the entrepreneurship program that summer. Instead, I doubled down on my part-time work and spent every free moment at the library, learning everything I could about business, marketing, and web development. I read biographies of successful entrepreneurs, studied case studies of companies that had started with nothing, and began developing a more sophisticated understanding of how the digital economy actually worked. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, noticed my constant presence and eventually approached me about my interests. When I explained my situation and my goals, she introduced me to Marcus Rodriguez, a Cedar Falls native who had moved to Austin, Texas, after college and built a successful digital marketing agency. Marcus was visiting his elderly parents and had stopped by the library to use their high-speed internet for a client call. Marcus and I talked for 2 hours that day. He looked at the basic websites I'd created, reviewed my business plan, and asked detailed questions about my understanding of digital marketing trends. At the end of our conversation, he made an offer that would change everything. Natalie, he said, I can't hire you officially because you're still in high school, but I can offer you something better. I'll teach you everything I know about digital marketing and web development through online mentorship. You'll work on real projects for my clients, learning the business from the ground up. In return, you'll help me with research and basic tasks that I can oversee remotely. No pay initially, but invaluable experience. When you graduate, if you're serious about this path, I'll help you figure out your next steps. I accepted immediately, though I knew I couldn't tell David or my mother about the arrangement. They would see it as another unrealistic fantasy, and David would likely forbid me from participating. Instead, I told them I'd picked up additional library volunteer hours and continued my education in secret. For the next year and a half, I spent every available moment learning from Marcus. He taught me advanced web development, search engine optimization, social media marketing, client management, and business development. More importantly, he helped me understand that success in the digital economy wasn't about where you came from or what your family's background was. It was about skill, persistence, and the ability to solve problems for other people. By the time I graduated high school, I had worked on projects for more than 30 small businesses across Ohio and Texas. I had generated measurable revenue increases for restaurants, retail stores, service providers, and manufacturers. I had a portfolio of successful campaigns and a growing network of satisfied clients who were willing to provide references and testimonials. David's reaction to my graduation was predictably dismissive. While other parents celebrated their children's college acceptances or career plans, David simply said, "Well, now you can find a real job and start contributing to the household expenses." When I mentioned that I had been working with clients and had saved several $1,000s from my projects, he scoffed. Playing around online isn't work, Natalie. I'm talking about a real job with a steady paycheck and benefits. That's when I realized that David would never see me as anything other than the burden he believed I was. His worldview was so limited, his understanding of the modern economy so outdated, that he literally could not comprehend what I had been building. To him, if it didn't involve physical labor or a traditional employer-employee relationship, it wasn't legitimate work. 3 days after graduation, I made the decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I had saved nearly $8,000 from my client work, enough to rent a small apartment in Austin and support myself for several months while building my business. Marcus had offered to help me find additional clients and had connected me with other young entrepreneurs in the Austin tech scene. When I announced my plans to move to Austin and start my own digital marketing consultancy, David's reaction was explosive. "This is insane," he shouted. "You're 18 years old with a high school education, and you think you're going to move to Texas and become some kind of business owner. You'll be broke and back here within 6 months, begging for help." My mother was gentler but equally doubtful. "Honey, maybe you should stay local and go to community college first. Build up some more experience. Austin is expensive, and you don't know anyone there, except for Marcus." But I had already made my decision. The girl who had spent 3 years being told she would never amount to anything was ready to prove exactly how wrong that prediction would be. I packed my belongings, withdrew my savings, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Austin, Texas. David's final words as I left were burned into my memory. When this ridiculous fantasy falls apart, don't come crying to us for help. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, and you're too stubborn and naive to see it. As the bus pulled away from the Cedar Falls station, I pressed my face to the window and watched the town disappear behind me. The factories, the empty storefronts, the limited horizons that David had insisted would define my entire life. I didn't cry or feel nostalgic. Instead, I felt a calm determination settling over me like armor. Every doubt, every dismissive comment, every prediction of my failure had become part of my motivation. The 8-hour bus ride to Austin gave me time to think about what I was really doing. I wasn't just starting a business or pursuing a career. I was proving that David Brennan's understanding of the world was fundamentally wrong. That people could transcend their circumstances through intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking. That success wasn't determined by your zip code, your family's economic status, or the limitations that other people tried to impose on your vision. When the bus finally pulled into the Austin station, I stepped off carrying 2 suitcases and a laptop bag.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
With $8,000 in my bank account and a business plan that I believed could change everything, I had no safety net, no fallback plan, and no guarantees. What I had was 3 years of preparation, a mentor who believed in my potential, and a burning need to prove that a girl from Cedar Falls, Ohio, could build something extraordinary. The first 6 months in Austin were harder than I had anticipated, but not in the ways that David had predicted. I didn't fail because I lacked business acumen, or because my services weren't valuable. The challenges came from the intense competition, the need to establish credibility as a young entrepreneur, and the constant pressure to reinvest every dollar back into growing the company. I rented a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that was transitioning from industrial to residential, splitting my time between client work and business development. Marcus introduced me to other entrepreneurs and helped me understand the local business ecosystem, but he made it clear that my success would depend entirely on my own efforts. The breakthrough came during my 8th month in Austin. A local restaurant chain was struggling with their online presence and had burned through 3 different marketing agencies without seeing results. Their social media engagement was minimal, their website was outdated, and their online reviews were inconsistent. More importantly, they were losing customers to competitors who had embraced digital marketing more effectively. I spent 2 weeks analyzing their business, studying their customer base, and developing a comprehensive strategy that addressed not just their immediate marketing needs, but their broader brand positioning challenges. When I presented my proposal, the owner was skeptical about working with such a young consultant, but the depth of my analysis and the specificity of my recommendations convinced him to give me a trial period. The results were dramatic. Within 3 months, their social media engagement had increased by 400%, their website traffic had doubled, and most importantly, their revenue had grown by 35%. The owner was so impressed that he not only extended my contract but began referring me to other business owners in his network. That single success opened doors throughout Austin's business community. Word spread that there was a young consultant who could deliver measurable results for small and medium-sized businesses struggling with digital marketing. My client base expanded rapidly, and I was able to raise my rates while still maintaining strong demand for my services. By my 2nd year in Austin, I had established Harper Digital Solutions as a legitimate consultancy with 12 regular clients and a waiting list for new projects. I had hired 2 part-time employees and was generating more revenue each month than David made at his garage in an entire year. But I wasn't satisfied with just being successful. I wanted to build something that would force David to confront exactly how wrong he had been about my potential. The opportunity came when I discovered a gap in the market that most established agencies were ignoring. Small businesses needed digital marketing services, but they couldn't afford the high fees charged by large agencies. At the same time, they lacked the expertise to manage their online presence effectively on their own. There was a huge opportunity for a company that could provide sophisticated marketing services at accessible price points while using technology to scale efficiently. I spent 6 months developing a proprietary software platform that would automate many of the routine tasks involved in digital marketing, while allowing for customized strategies based on each client's specific industry and goals. The platform could manage social media posting, monitor online reviews, track website analytics, and generate detailed reports, all while requiring minimal human oversight for routine maintenance. The software development pushed me to learn skills far beyond my original expertise in marketing and web design. I taught myself database management, user experience design, and business process automation. I worked 16-hour days for months, testing and refining the platform until it could deliver results that matched or exceeded what traditional agencies provided at much higher costs. When Harper Digital Solutions launched the new platform-based service, the response exceeded my most optimistic projections. We could serve 3 times as many clients, while maintaining the same quality standards, which meant we could offer services at prices that small businesses could actually afford. Within 18 months, we had over 200 active clients across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. The financial transformation was remarkable, but the personal satisfaction went deeper than money. Every new client, every successful campaign, every positive review was proof that David's narrow worldview had been completely wrong. People from small towns could build significant businesses. Intelligence and determination could overcome economic disadvantages. Success wasn't limited to people who accepted the limitations that others tried to impose on them. By my 4th year in Austin, Harper Digital Solutions had evolved into something much larger than I had originally envisioned. We weren't just a consultancy anymore. We were a technology company that happened to focus on marketing services. The software platform had become sophisticated enough that other marketing agencies were licensing it for their own client work. We were generating revenue from software licensing, consulting services, and training programs for other entrepreneurs who wanted to build similar businesses. The growth had been organic and sustainable, funded entirely by reinvested profits rather than outside investment. This meant I maintained complete control over the company's direction while building substantial personal wealth. By the time I turned 26, my personal net worth had reached several $1,000,000, and Harper Digital Solutions was being recognized as one of the fastest-growing privately held companies in Texas. But I still hadn't achieved the level of success that would force David to confront his fundamental assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of accomplishing. I needed something undeniable, something that would reach back to Cedar Falls, Ohio, and prove beyond any doubt that his predictions about my future had been catastrophically wrong. That's when Marcus suggested I apply for Forbes 30 under 30 inches recognition in the marketing and advertising category. The application process was rigorous, requiring detailed financial documentation, client testimonials, industry references, and a comprehensive analysis of my company's innovation and impact on the digital marketing sector. I spent weeks preparing the application, documenting not just Harper Digital Solutions' financial success, but its broader influence on how small businesses approach digital marketing. We had developed training programs that had been adopted by business schools, created case studies that were being used by other consultants, and built technology that was changing industry standards for service delivery and client management. The interview process was intimidating but exhilarating. I found myself in rooms with established industry leaders, venture capitalists, and other successful entrepreneurs, discussing market trends and business strategies at a level that would have been unimaginable when I was sitting in David's kitchen, being told I would never amount to anything. When Forbes contacted me 6 months later to inform me that I had been selected for their 30 under 30 inches list, my first emotion wasn't joy or pride. It was a quiet, deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've proven something important, not just to the world, but to yourself. The recognition would be published in the magazine's annual issue featuring young innovators, complete with a cover photo and detailed profile of my company's growth and impact. I didn't tell my mother about the Forbes recognition immediately. Instead, I waited until the magazine was published and available in stores across the country, including the small newsstand in Cedar Falls, where my mother occasionally bought magazines while grocery shopping. I wanted her to discover it the same way David would, as an undeniable fact, rather than another one of my unrealistic dreams. The call came on a Tuesday morning. My mother's voice was shaking as she spoke. "Natalie, honey, is this real? Are you really on the cover of Forbes magazine?" I could hear David in the background, his voice confused and disbelieving. "Let me see that," he was saying. "That can't be right. It's real, Mom," I said quietly. "Harper Digital Solutions is worth $12 million now. We employ 47 people full-time and have over 800 clients across 15 states. Forbes recognized us as one of the most innovative companies in digital marketing." The silence that followed was the sound of David Brennan's worldview collapsing. For 8 years, he had built his sense of superiority on the assumption that I was a naive dreamer who would eventually fail and validate his cynical understanding of social and economic mobility. Now he was confronted with evidence that his stepdaughter had not only succeeded beyond anything he had ever accomplished, but had built something that was being recognized at a national level. "I don't understand," my mother finally said. "How did this happen? When we last talked, you were just doing consulting work." "I've been building this for 8 years, Mom. Every day since I left Cedar Falls. Remember when David said I would never amount to anything? That people like us don't become business owners? I've thought about those words every single day, and they've motivated me to prove him wrong in the most comprehensive way possible." I could hear my mother crying softly, and I knew she was remembering all the times she had failed to defend my dreams or support my ambitions. All the moments when she had chosen David's narrow perspective over her daughter's potential. The weight of those choices was finally becoming clear to her. "Can I talk to him?" I asked. There was a long pause, then David's voice came on the line. He sounded smaller somehow, less certain than I had ever heard him. "Natalie," he said slowly. "I saw the magazine. I don't understand how this happened." "It happened," I said, "because everything you believed about success and failure was wrong. Because intelligence and hard work can overcome the limitations that other people try to impose. Because a girl from Cedar Falls, Ohio, can build a multi-million-dollar company if she's willing to ignore people who tell her it's impossible." The conversation that followed would reshape our family relationships forever, but that's a story for tomorrow. What matters today is understanding that David Brennan's cruel prediction about my future had become the foundation for my success. Every doubt, every dismissive comment, every moment when he made me feel small and worthless had been transformed into fuel for building something extraordinary. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up providing the greatest gifts, even if that's not what they intended. David thought he was teaching me to accept limitations, but what he actually taught me was that other people's understanding of what's possible is often far too narrow. He thought he was protecting me from disappointment, but what he actually did was give me the motivation to exceed even my own expectations. Standing in my Austin office, looking out at the city skyline that represented everything I had built, I realized that David had been right about one thing. I would never be the person he thought I should be. I would never accept the limitations he tried to impose, never settle for the small life he believed was appropriate for someone with my background. In that sense, I had indeed never amounted to anything that he could understand or respect, and I had never been more grateful for anything in my life. David's voice carried a tremor I had never heard before. "Natalie, I need to understand something. When you left here 8 years ago, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life. I was convinced you'd come crawling back within months, broke and defeated. How did I get it so wrong?" The question hung in the air between Austin and Cedar Falls, carried through fiber optic cables that connected my world of glass office buildings and venture capital meetings to his world of grease-stained coveralls and small-town certainties. For a moment, I considered giving him a simple answer, something that would let him save face while acknowledging my success. But 8 years of building something extraordinary from nothing had taught me that truth, even uncomfortable truth, was more valuable than politeness. "You got it wrong," I said, "because you confused your own limitations with universal laws. You believed that because you had never seen anyone from Cedar Falls build something significant, it meant it was impossible. You mistook your lack of imagination for wisdom and your fear of failure for practical advice." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line, processing words that challenged everything he had believed about social mobility, economic opportunity, and the nature of success itself. My mother had apparently taken the phone back because her voice came through next, tentative and filled with a regret that had been building for years. "Natalie, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. All those times when David said you were wasting your time with computers and business plans, all those times when I didn't stand up for you or support your dreams, did that hurt you as much as I think it did?" The question hit deeper than I had expected. I had spent years focusing on the fuel that criticism had provided, the motivation that came from proving doubters wrong. But I had spent less time acknowledging the genuine pain that came from having the people who were supposed to support you instead consistently undermine your confidence and ambitions. Yes, Mom, it hurt tremendously. Not just because David didn't believe in me, but because you didn't either. When your own family tells you that your dreams are unrealistic and that you should settle for less, it creates a wound that doesn't heal easily. I spent years questioning whether I was being naive or foolish, wondering if maybe you and David were right and I was just too stubborn to see it. But clearly we were wrong, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Obviously we were completely wrong about what you were capable of. You were wrong about what anyone is capable of. I corrected gently, this isn't just about me being special or uniquely talented. You were wrong about how the world works, about what creates opportunities, about what determines whether someone succeeds or fails. David's view of the economy hasn't been accurate for decades, but he was so confident in his outdated understanding that he convinced you to doubt your own daughter's potential. What I didn't tell her was how many nights I had spent during my first year in Austin questioning everything about my decision to leave Cedar Falls. The loneliness of building something entirely on your own, without family support or encouragement, had been more difficult than any business challenge I had faced. There were moments when David's predictions seemed prophetic, when client rejections or financial pressures made me wonder if I was indeed too naive to understand my own limitations. The turning point had come during my 10th month in Austin, when I was struggling to land a significant client that would stabilize my cash flow and validate my business model. I had pitched 17 different companies over 6 weeks, coming close with several but ultimately being told that they had decided to go with more established agencies. The rejections were polite but consistent. I was too young, too inexperienced, too much of a risk for companies that needed guaranteed results. After the 17th rejection, I sat in my tiny apartment at 2 in the morning, staring at my laptop screen and calculating how many more months I could survive on my remaining savings. David's voice echoed in my memory, "You'll be broken back here within 6 months begging for help." I was past the 6-month mark, but not by much, and the mathematical reality of my situation was becoming impossible to ignore. That's when I called Marcus, not for business advice, but because I needed to hear from someone who understood what I was trying to accomplish. It was late in Austin, but even later in Ohio, where Marcus was visiting his parents. I expected to leave a voicemail, but he answered on the second ring. "Natalie, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I explained my situation, the string of rejections, the dwindling savings, and the growing doubt about whether David's assessment of my prospects had been more accurate than I wanted to admit. Marcus listened without interrupting, then asked a question that reframed everything. "Are you failing because your services don't work, or because you haven't found the right clients yet?" The distinction was crucial. Every project I had completed had generated measurable results for my clients. My portfolio showed consistent success in improving online engagement, increasing website traffic, and driving actual revenue growth for the businesses I worked with. The problem wasn't the quality of my work, it was the difficulty of convincing decision-makers to take a chance on someone who didn't fit their preconceptions about what a successful consultant should look like. The services work, I admitted. Every client I've had has seen real improvements in their business metrics. I just can't seem to get past the initial skepticism about my age and experience. "Then you're not failing," Marcus said firmly. "You're learning." Every successful entrepreneur goes through this phase where they have to prove that their unconventional approach can deliver conventional results. The companies that are rejecting you aren't necessarily wrong to be cautious, but they're missing an opportunity. Your job is to find the companies that are smart enough to recognize that opportunity. He was right, but finding those companies required a different approach than I had been taking. Instead of pursuing large corporations that could afford to be risk-averse, I needed to focus on smaller businesses that were hungry enough for results to overlook their concerns about my age and experience. These companies couldn't afford to hire established agencies, which meant they were either handling their digital marketing poorly or ignoring it entirely. The shift in strategy was immediately effective. Small business owners who were struggling with their online presence didn't care about my age if I could solve their problems affordably and efficiently. They were results-oriented rather than credentials-oriented, which played to my strengths perfectly. Within 3 months of adjusting my target market, I had signed 12 new clients and was generating more revenue than I had ever imagined possible. But the real breakthrough came when I started thinking beyond individual client relationships towards systematic solutions for common problems. Most small businesses struggled with the same digital marketing challenges: inconsistent social media presence, outdated websites, poor search engine visibility, and ineffective online advertising. The traditional consulting model required customizing solutions for each client, which was time-intensive and limited scalability. I began developing standardized processes and automated tools that could address these common problems efficiently while still allowing for customization based on each business's specific needs. This approach let me serve more clients without sacrificing quality, and it created opportunities for passive revenue through software licensing and training programs. The development of these systematic solutions required learning skills that went far beyond traditional marketing expertise. I taught myself software development, database management, user interface design, and business process automation. The learning curve was steep, but every new capability expanded what I could offer clients and how efficiently I could deliver results. More importantly, the process of building sophisticated business systems taught me that David's understanding of work and value creation was fundamentally outdated. He thought in terms of trading time for money, of physical labor and traditional employer-employee relationships. But the digital economy operated on completely different principles: scalability, automation, intellectual property, and network effects. The businesses I was building could generate revenue while I slept, serve clients across multiple time zones simultaneously, and create value that compounded over time rather than requiring constant physical presence. This wasn't just a different career path from what David had envisioned for me, it was a different category of economic activity entirely. By my third year in Austin, Harper Digital Solutions had evolved into something that would have been impossible to explain to David when I left Cedar Falls. We weren't just providing marketing services, we were licensing software to other agencies, training consultants across the country, and developing new technologies that were being adopted by businesses in industries I had never worked with directly. The financial success was significant, but the intellectual satisfaction was even greater. I had identified problems that affected thousands of businesses, developed scalable solutions, and built systems that created value for multiple stakeholders simultaneously. This was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that the entrepreneurship program at Ohio State had been designed to foster, the program that David had dismissed as a waste of money and time. The irony wasn't lost on me. If David had supported my participation in that program during high school, I might have developed these capabilities 3 years earlier. His attempt to protect me from disappointment had actually delayed my success and cost our family the financial benefits that could have transformed all of our lives. But the delay had also taught me something valuable about the psychology of achievement and motivation. The obstacles that David had placed in my path, the dismissive comments and active discouragement, had forced me to develop a level of self-reliance and determination that might not have emerged under more supportive circumstances. I had learned to trust my own judgment, even when everyone around me disagreed, to persist through setbacks without external validation, and to build something significant without waiting for permission or approval from authority figures. These psychological capabilities had proven as valuable as any technical skill in building Harper Digital Solutions. Entrepreneurship required making decisions with incomplete information, persisting through inevitable failures and rejections, and maintaining confidence in your vision even when market feedback suggested you might be wrong. The years of having my judgment questioned and my ambitions dismissed had been excellent preparation for these challenges. The validation that came with the Forbes recognition was deeply satisfying, but it wasn't the most important outcome of my journey. The real prize was the knowledge that I had correctly assessed my own potential despite consistent opposition from the people closest to me. I had trusted my instincts about market opportunities, technological trends, and business strategy, and those instincts had proven remarkably accurate. This self-knowledge was transferable to every future challenge I would face. Whether I was evaluating new business opportunities, hiring employees, entering new markets, or developing strategic partnerships, I could trust my judgment because I had tested it under difficult circumstances and proven its reliability. The confidence that came from this track record was worth more than any external recognition or financial milestone. The conversation with David and my mother continued for nearly 2 hours, covering 8 years of assumptions, missed opportunities, and fundamental misunderstandings about how success is created in the modern economy. David struggled to reconcile his image of me as an impractical dreamer with the evidence of Harper Digital Solutions' growth and industry recognition. "I still don't understand how this happened," he said repeatedly. "When you were living here, you spent all your time on that computer, but it just looked like you were playing around. I never saw any evidence that you were building something real." "That's because you didn't know what real work looks like in the digital economy," I explained. "When I was coding websites, analyzing marketing data, and developing business strategies, it looked like playing around to you because it didn't involve physical tools or traditional workplace structures. But those activities were generating real value for real clients who paid real money for measurable business improvements. The educational process was difficult for both of us." David had spent decades building his identity around his expertise in mechanical systems and traditional business relationships. Acknowledging that his stepdaughter had mastered economic principles that he didn't understand required questioning fundamental assumptions about intelligence, work, and value creation. But the conversation was necessary for both of us to move forward. David needed to understand that his economic worldview was incomplete, and I needed to process 8 years of hurt and frustration that had been buried under layers of professional success and personal achievement. My mother's role in the conversation was particularly complex. She had been caught between her loyalty to David and her love for me, consistently choosing to avoid conflict rather than advocating for her daughter's dreams. The success of Harper Digital Solutions forced her to confront the cost of those choices, both for me and for our family's financial situation. "Natalie, I keep thinking about all the times I could have supported you but didn't," she said quietly. "All the times I let David convince me that you were being unrealistic instead of trusting my own instincts about your capabilities. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I'm also ashamed of how little help you got from us along the way." Her acknowledgement meant more to me than David's grudging recognition of my success. My mother's support wouldn't have guaranteed my business success, but it would have made the emotional journey significantly easier. The loneliness of building something important, while feeling disconnected from your family, creates a particular kind of pain that financial success doesn't automatically heal. "I forgive you, Mom," I said, meaning it completely. "You were trying to protect me from disappointment in the only way you knew how. The problem wasn't your motivation, it was your understanding of what was actually possible for someone with my skills and determination." The conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in our family relationships, but it also highlighted how much had changed in 8 years. I had built a life and career that were completely independent of David's approval or understanding. His recognition of my success was personally satisfying, but it wasn't necessary for my continued growth or happiness. The distance between Cedar Falls and Austin represented more than geography. It represented different ways of understanding opportunity, risk, innovation, and the relationship between individual effort and economic outcomes. I had moved to a city where entrepreneurship was celebrated, where young people were encouraged to build ambitious projects, and where failure was seen as education rather than confirmation of personal inadequacy. This cultural environment had been as important as any business strategy in enabling my success. Surrounding myself with people who understood the digital economy, who had built successful companies themselves, and who viewed ambitious goals as normal rather than unrealistic, had provided crucial psychological support during the difficult early phases of building Harper Digital Solutions. David's final comment in our conversation revealed how much he still struggled to understand what I had accomplished. "I guess I was wrong about your business sense," he said, "but I still think you got lucky with the timing. If you had tried this 10 years earlier or 10 years later, it might not have worked out the same way." The comment showed that he still didn't grasp the fundamental principles that had driven my success. Timing had been a factor, but success in the digital economy was primarily about identifying problems, developing solutions, and executing systematically over extended periods. The opportunities I had pursued would exist for decades, and new opportunities were constantly emerging as technology continued evolving. But I didn't argue with his assessment. David needed to believe that my success involved elements beyond his control or understanding, because acknowledging that I had simply outworked and outthought his predictions would require questioning too many of his core beliefs about merit, opportunity, and social mobility. The conversation ended with tentative plans for me to visit Cedar Falls during the holidays, something I hadn't done in 3 years. The prospect of returning home as the successful entrepreneur David had insisted I could never become felt like completing a circle that had been drawn 8 years earlier when I boarded that bus to Austin with 2 suitcases and a business plan that no one in my family believed could work. But the real completion wouldn't come from David's acknowledgement of my success. It would come from demonstrating that his narrow understanding of what was possible had been replaced by something much more expansive and optimistic about human potential and economic opportunity. Standing in my Austin office that evening, looking out at a city that had provided the environment for me to build something extraordinary, I realized that David's cruel prediction had become the foundation for everything I had accomplished. His certainty that I would never amount to anything had motivated me to prove that limitation was often just a failure of imagination, disguised as practical wisdom. The Forbes recognition was gratifying, but it was also just the beginning. Harper Digital Solutions was positioned to expand into new markets, develop more sophisticated technologies, and serve thousands of additional clients over the coming years. The business principles and personal capabilities I had developed during 8 years of proving David wrong would enable achievements that neither of us could currently imagine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to demonstrate that success belongs to people who are willing to work systematically toward ambitious goals regardless of what others believe about their prospects. David's education about modern economic realities was just beginning, and I intended to be a patient but persistent teacher. The girl from Cedar Falls, Ohio, who would never amount to anything, was about to show him exactly how much someone could accomplish when they refused to accept other people's limitations as their own. The call came 3 weeks after the Forbes article was published. Marcus Rodriguez, my mentor and now business partner, had been monitoring industry publications and social media for reactions to our recognition. What he discovered surprised both of us. "Natalie, you need to see this," Marcus said, walking into my office with his laptop. "Remember how we thought the Forbes coverage would mainly impact our Texas market? Look at these numbers." The screen showed metrics that seemed almost impossible. Website traffic to Harper Digital Solutions had increased by 1,400% since the article was published. More importantly, the nature of the inquiries had shifted dramatically. Instead of small businesses asking about basic social media management, we were receiving calls from mid-sized companies across the country wanting to discuss comprehensive digital transformation strategies. "We've got acquisition offers from 3 different agencies in California," Marcus continued. "Licensing requests for our software platform from companies in 12 states. And this morning I got a call from a venture capital firm in New York, asking if we're interested in scaling nationally with their backing." The opportunity was exactly what every entrepreneur dreams of, but it also created a dilemma I hadn't anticipated. Growing Harper Digital Solutions into a national company would require resources, infrastructure, and strategic decisions that would fundamentally change the business I had built. More importantly, it would require moving beyond the personal mission that had motivated me for 8 years, proving David Brennan wrong about my potential. That mission had been accomplished. The Forbes recognition, the financial success, and the industry respect had definitively demonstrated that his predictions about my future had been catastrophically inaccurate. But success creates its own momentum, and the opportunities emerging from that recognition were bigger than anything I had originally imagined. The venture capital conversation was scheduled for the following week in Manhattan. I had never spoken with professional investors before, but Marcus had experience with the process from his previous company. He coached me on what to expect, how to present our growth story, and what terms would be reasonable for a company at our stage of development. "The key thing to remember," Marcus explained, "is that you're not asking them for help, you're evaluating whether they can add value to what you've already built." Harper Digital Solutions is profitable, growing rapidly, and positioned perfectly for the market trends that are driving demand for our services. We have leverage in these conversations. The psychological shift was significant. For 8 years, I had been focused on proving that I could build something successful, despite having no family support, limited resources, and widespread skepticism about my prospects. Now I was being courted by investors who wanted to provide millions of dollars to accelerate growth that was already happening organically. The night before flying to New York, I called my mother to tell her about the meeting. I wasn't seeking advice or approval, but I wanted her to understand the magnitude of what was happening with the company she had once dismissed as an unrealistic fantasy. "They want to invest how much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $25 million for a 40% stake in the company, I explained. That would value Harper Digital Solutions at $62.5 million total. My personal share would be worth about $37 million. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice thick with emotion. Natalie, I need to tell you something. After our conversation about the Forbes article, I've been doing research online about your company. I've read articles about digital marketing, looked at websites for businesses similar to yours, and tried to understand what you've actually built. And what did you discover? I asked, genuinely curious about her conclusions. I discovered that I don't understand any of it, she said with a laugh that sounded almost relieved. The technology, the business models, the industry terminology, none of it makes sense to me. But what I do understand is that very smart people are writing very impressive things about your work, and that companies are paying significant amounts of money for your services. Her honesty was refreshing. Instead of pretending to understand concepts that were outside her experience, she was acknowledging the limits of her knowledge while recognizing the evidence of success. It was a more mature response than David's continued insistence that my achievements were primarily due to luck or timing. More importantly, she continued, I've been thinking about all the times over the years when you tried to explain what you were working on, and I dismissed it as computer games or unrealistic dreaming. I realize now that I was watching you build something extraordinary, but I was too ignorant about the modern economy to recognize what I was seeing. The admission meant more to me than the venture capital interest or the Forbes recognition. My mother was acknowledging not just that she had been wrong about my prospects, but that she had failed to educate herself about the industries and technologies that were reshaping economic opportunities. Her willingness to confront that ignorance suggested genuine growth rather than just grudging acceptance of my success. What does David think about the investor meeting? I asked. David is having a harder time processing all of this, she said carefully. He keeps saying that he doesn't understand how writing code and managing websites can be worth tens of millions of dollars. Yesterday he asked me if I thought you were involved in something illegal because legitimate businesses don't grow that fast. The comment revealed how completely David's worldview had been shattered by my success. Rather than updating his understanding of how value is created in the digital economy, he was questioning the legitimacy of achievements that didn't fit his preconceptions. It was psychological self-defense, disguised as skepticism. He's not wrong that traditional businesses don't usually grow this fast, I explained. But technology companies operate under different rules. When you create software that can serve thousands of clients simultaneously, or develop systems that automate work that used to require manual labor, you can scale revenue much more rapidly than businesses that are limited by physical constraints. Could you explain that to him when you visit for Christmas? She asked. I think it would help him understand that what you've built is legitimate, even if it's different from anything he's encountered before. The request highlighted how much our family dynamics had shifted. 8 years earlier, my mother had sided with David's dismissive assessment of my ambitions. Now she was asking me to educate him about economic principles he didn't understand. The role reversal was complete, but it also created new responsibilities I wasn't sure I wanted to accept. The flight to New York gave me time to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed since leaving Cedar Falls. I was traveling first class to a meeting with investors who wanted to give me more money than most people in my hometown would earn in multiple lifetimes. The girl who had been told she would never amount to anything was now being pursued by some of the most sophisticated financial minds in the country. But the external transformation was less significant than the internal one. 8 years of building something meaningful from nothing had taught me to trust my own judgment about complex decisions, to remain calm under pressure, and to evaluate opportunities based on long-term strategic value rather than short-term validation or financial gain. The venture capital firm occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, with views that stretched across Central Park to the Hudson River. The conference room where we met contained artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses, and the partners who joined the discussion had resumes that read like a directory of successful technology companies. We've been following Harper Digital Solutions for 6 months, the lead partner explained. Your growth trajectory, profit margins, and market positioning are exactly what we look for in scaling opportunities. More importantly, the technology platform you've developed addresses a massive market inefficiency that most established players have ignored. The conversation was simultaneously flattering and challenging. These investors understood my business model better than my own family ever had, but they also asked probing questions about competitive threats, market saturation, and strategic vulnerabilities that I needed to address thoughtfully. The question we're evaluating, another partner said, is whether Harper Digital Solutions is positioned to become a category-defining company that captures a significant percentage of the small business digital marketing market, or whether you'll remain a successful but ultimately regional player. The distinction was crucial. Remaining regional would mean continued financial success and personal satisfaction, but it would also mean accepting limitations on the company's impact and growth potential. Pursuing national expansion would require significant changes to our operations, culture, and strategic focus, but it could also create opportunities to influence how millions of small businesses approach digital marketing. What would national expansion require from us operationally? Marcus asked. Primarily 3 things, the lead partner responded. First, hiring senior leadership with experience scaling technology companies beyond the founder level. Second, investing heavily in sales and marketing infrastructure to compete in markets where you don't have existing relationships. Third, accelerating product development to stay ahead of competitors who are certainly studying your model and preparing their own versions. Each requirement represented a fundamental change to how Harper Digital Solutions operated. We had succeeded by maintaining lean operations, focusing on client results rather than aggressive marketing, and developing technology incrementally based on actual client needs. The proposed changes would transform us into a different kind of company entirely. What's the timeline for making this decision? I asked. We'd like to move quickly, the partner said. The market opportunity is significant now, but it won't remain uncontested indefinitely. Other investors are also evaluating companies in this space, and established agencies are beginning to develop competing platforms. First mover advantage is valuable, but only if you move decisively. The pressure was polite but real. This was the kind of opportunity that might not come again, but accepting it would require committing to a growth trajectory that would consume the next several years of my life and fundamentally change my relationship with the company I had built. The flight back to Austin was turbulent, both meteorologically and emotionally. I had 8 hours to process the most significant business decision I had ever faced, while also preparing for a Christmas visit to Cedar Falls that would force me to confront 8 years of family history in a completely new context. Marcus and I spent the following week analyzing the investment proposal from every angle we could imagine. The financial terms were generous, the strategic support was valuable, and the market opportunity was genuine. But accepting outside investment would also mean accountability to people who hadn't been part of building Harper Digital Solutions from nothing, and whose priorities might not always align with mine. The fundamental question, Marcus said during one of our strategy sessions, is whether you're ready to stop being an entrepreneur and start being a CEO. They're different roles that require different skills and produce different kinds of satisfaction. He was right. Entrepreneurship had been about proving that my vision was correct despite widespread skepticism. Being a CEO would be about executing other people's expectations for growth and profitability. Both were valuable, but they appealed to different motivations and would produce different outcomes. The decision became clearer when I considered what David would think about each option. Remaining regional would confirm his belief that people from small towns should accept appropriate limitations on their ambitions. Pursuing national expansion would demonstrate that there were no inherent constraints on what someone could accomplish if they were willing to work systematically toward ambitious goals. But that consideration also revealed how much my thinking was still influenced by the desire to prove David wrong, even 8 years after leaving Cedar Falls. Building a company to demonstrate a point to my stepfather was different from building a company to create maximum value for clients, employees, and stakeholders. The psychological motivation that had driven my initial success might not be the best foundation for future strategic decisions. The realization was both liberating and unsettling. If I accepted the investment and pursued national expansion, it needed to be because I believed it was the right strategic decision for Harper Digital Solutions, not because it would provide additional evidence of David's misjudgment. If I declined the investment and remained regional, it needed to be because I valued the current business model and company culture, not because I was satisfied with having already proven my point. The Christmas visit to Cedar Falls was scheduled for the week after my decision deadline. I would either be returning home as the founder of a regional company that had achieved modest success, or as the CEO of a nationally expanding technology company backed by sophisticated investors. The difference would be visible to everyone in town, but it would be most meaningful to David and my mother. 3 days before the investment decision deadline, I received an unexpected call from Tyler Brennan, David's son from his first marriage. Tyler and I had never been close during our teenage years, partly because of the age difference, and partly because he had always aligned himself with his father's dismissive attitude toward my ambitions. "Natalie, I hope it's okay that I'm calling," Tyler said, his voice uncertain. "I got your number from your mom. I wanted to talk to you about something that's been bothering me since the Forbes article came out." "Of course, Tyler, what's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about all the times when we were younger, when Dad would criticize your interest in computers and business stuff," he said slowly. "I always went along with it because I thought he knew what he was talking about. But seeing what you've accomplished, I'm starting to realize that maybe I was missing opportunities too." The conversation that followed was more honest than any we had ever had. Tyler explained that he had always been interested in the technical aspects of automotive repair, particularly the increasing integration of computer systems in modern vehicles. But David had discouraged him from pursuing formal training in automotive technology, insisting that traditional mechanical skills were more reliable and valuable. "I'm 29 years old, and I'm still working at Dad's garage for barely above minimum wage," Tyler said. "Meanwhile, you're 8 years younger than me, and you've built something worth tens of millions of dollars. I can't help wondering what I might have accomplished if I had ignored Dad's advice and pursued the technology training I was interested in." His honesty was painful to hear, but it also illustrated how David's narrow worldview had limited not just my opportunities but Tyler's as well. The same fear of change and resistance to new technologies that had led David to dismiss my ambitions had also prevented him from encouraging his own son to develop skills that were increasingly valuable in the automotive industry. "It's not too late, Tyler," I said. "The automotive industry is going through massive technological changes right now. Electric vehicles, autonomous driving systems, integrated computer diagnostics. There are huge opportunities for people who understand both traditional mechanical systems and modern technology." "But I'm almost 30, with no formal education beyond high school," Tyler replied. "How could I possibly compete with people who have engineering degrees and years of experience with automotive technology?" The question was exactly the kind of limiting thinking that David had tried to impose on me 8 years earlier. Tyler was assuming that his current circumstances determined his future possibilities, rather than recognizing that intelligence, motivation, and strategic learning could overcome educational disadvantages. Tyler, 8 years ago, I was 18 years old with a high school education, living in Cedar Falls, Ohio, with no business experience and no family support for my ambitions. Today I'm considering a $25 million investment offer from venture capitalists in New York. The difference wasn't my starting point, it was my willingness to learn systematically and work toward goals that other people thought were unrealistic. The conversation with Tyler crystallized something important about the investment decision I was facing. My success with Harper Digital Solutions had never been just about proving David wrong or achieving personal financial independence. It had been about demonstrating that intelligence and determination could overcome circumstantial disadvantages, and that ambitious goals were achievable for people who were willing to work systematically toward them. If I accepted the venture capital investment and pursued national expansion, it wouldn't just grow my company, it would create a more visible example of what was possible for people from small towns who were willing to think beyond traditional economic limitations. The success of Harper Digital Solutions on a national scale could inspire other entrepreneurs to pursue ambitious projects despite family skepticism or limited initial resources. But if I declined the investment and remained regional, I would be accepting precisely the kind of limitation that David had always insisted was realistic and appropriate. I would be choosing safety and comfort over growth and impact, which would validate his belief that people from places like Cedar Falls should be satisfied with modest achievements rather than pursuing transformational opportunities. The decision became clear. I would accept the investment, pursue national expansion, and build Harper Digital Solutions into the kind of company that could influence how millions of small businesses approach digital marketing. Not because I needed to prove anything more to David, but because it was the right strategic decision for the company and the right way to maximize the positive impact of what we had built. The call to the venture capital firm was brief and professional. Yes, we were interested in moving forward with the investment. Yes, we understood the growth expectations and operational changes that would be required. Yes, we were committed to building Harper Digital Solutions into a category-defining company that could capture significant market share nationally. The celebration that evening with Marcus and our key employees was subdued but meaningful. We weren't just closing a financial transaction, we were committing to a level of growth and responsibility that would change all of our lives. The regional company that had proven David wrong about my potential was about to become something much larger and more ambitious. The news reached Cedar Falls before I did. My mother called the morning after the investment announcement appeared in the Austin Business Journal, her voice a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "Natalie, honey, I saw the article online. $25 million. Are you really going to be running a national company now?" "That's the plan, Mom. We'll be opening offices in 6 cities over the next 18 months and hiring about 200 new employees. Harper Digital Solutions is going to become the kind of company that changes how an entire industry operates. And you'll be the CEO of all that." "I'll be the CEO of all that." The silence that followed was filled with 8 years of recognition about how wrong she and David had been about what I was capable of accomplishing. But it was also filled with anticipation about what would happen when I returned to Cedar Falls in 3 days, carrying news that would force David to confront not just the success of my original business, but its transformation into something beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. The girl who would never amount to anything was about to show him exactly how much someone could amount to when they refused to accept other people's definitions of what was realistic or appropriate for people like us. The plane descended through gray December clouds toward Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, bringing me back to Ohio for the first time in 3 years. Below, the landscape looked exactly as I remembered: industrial buildings scattered among residential neighborhoods, highways cutting through farmland that stretched to the horizon, and the general sense of economic stagnation that had defined the region for decades. But I was returning as a fundamentally different person than the one who had left. The regional flights, rental cars, and modest hotels of my early business trips had been replaced by first-class tickets, luxury vehicles, and accommodations that reflected the financial success of Harper Digital Solutions. More importantly, I was returning with news that would force everyone in Cedar Falls to completely recalibrate their understanding of what someone from our town could accomplish. The drive from Cleveland to Cedar Falls took 90 minutes, giving me time to process the complexity of emotions that came with returning home as a nationally recognized entrepreneur. The landscape was familiar but somehow smaller than my memories, as if the intervening years had shrunk the physical spaces that had once seemed so defining and permanent. Cedar Falls itself appeared unchanged. The same struggling downtown district, the same collection of chain restaurants along the main highway, the same sense that the town's best days were several decades in the past. But I now understood that this stagnation was a choice rather than an inevitability. Communities that embraced change and invested in education and technology were thriving, while places like Cedar Falls that resisted innovation were slowly declining. My mother had insisted on preparing Christmas dinner for the extended family, which meant David's relatives would be present for conversations about my business success. The thought of explaining venture capital, digital marketing technology, and national expansion strategies to people who had watched David dismiss my ambitions for years was both amusing and slightly anxiety-inducing. The house looked exactly as I remembered, down to the same furniture and decorations that had been there when I left for Austin. But walking through the door felt like entering a museum of my former life, rather than returning home. Everything was familiar but somehow irrelevant to who I had become and what I had accomplished. David was sitting in his usual chair in the living room, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He looked older than I had expected, his hair grayer and his posture more stooped. But his expression when he saw me was guarded, as if he wasn't sure how to interact with the stepdaughter who had proven him so thoroughly wrong about her potential. "Hello, David," I said simply, setting down my luggage. "Natalie," he replied with a nod. "Your mother's been cooking all morning. She's excited about having you here for Christmas." The conversation was polite but strained, each of us uncertain about how to navigate the new dynamic created by my success. For 8 years, our relationship had been defined by his confidence in his assessment of my prospects and my determination to prove him wrong. Now that I had accomplished that goal decisively, neither of us was sure what came next. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her face lighting up with genuine joy at seeing me. The embrace we shared was longer and more emotional than any we had exchanged in years, carrying the weight of regret, pride, and recognition that our relationship had been fundamentally changed by my success. "You look wonderful, honey," she said, stepping back to study my face. Different somehow, more confident. 8 years of building something meaningful tends to change a person, I replied with a smile. Especially when you have to do it without family support. The comment wasn't intended as an attack, but it landed heavily in the room anyway. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while my mother's expression showed the guilt she still carried about not advocating for my dreams when I needed her support most. I deserved that, my mother said quietly. I've had 3 years to think about how badly I failed you during the time when you needed encouragement most. I'm sorry, Natalie. I'm deeply sorry for not believing in you. Her apology was genuine and complete, addressing not just her lack of support but her active participation in David's campaign to convince me that my ambitions were unrealistic. It was the kind of acknowledgement I had hoped for but never expected to receive. David remained silent during this exchange, but his body language suggested internal struggle. Acknowledging that he had been wrong about my prospects would require questioning fundamental beliefs about social mobility, economic opportunity, and the relationship between individual effort and success. For someone who had built his identity around being practical and realistic, such recognition was psychologically threatening. The afternoon was spent in careful conversation about my business, with my mother asking detailed questions about how digital marketing worked, and David listening with obvious skepticism about the legitimacy of economic activity he didn't understand. I explained the basic principles of online advertising, search engine optimization, and social media marketing, but I could see that the concepts remained abstract and unconvincing to David. So companies pay you to post things on Facebook? David asked, his tone suggesting that such work couldn't possibly justify significant compensation. That's an oversimplification, but social media management is one component of what we do, I explained. More importantly, we help businesses understand how potential customers find information online, how to present their services effectively in digital formats, and how to measure the return on investment from various marketing activities. And businesses actually pay significant money for this kind of advice. Our average client pays us $4,800 per month for comprehensive digital marketing services. Our largest client pays us $32,000 per month. We currently serve over 800 clients, which generates annual revenue of approximately $46 million. The numbers seemed to shock David into silence. He had clearly understood that my business was successful, but the specific financial details were beyond anything he had imagined possible for a company that existed primarily online. $46 million. My mother repeated, her voice barely audible. From helping businesses with computers and websites. From solving real problems that affect how businesses find customers and generate revenue, I corrected. The technology is just the tool. The value comes from understanding how markets work and helping business owners navigate economic changes they don't fully understand themselves. The explanation seemed to resonate more with my mother than with David. She could grasp the concept that business owners might need expert help with unfamiliar challenges, even if she didn't understand the technical details. David, however, appeared to be struggling with the fundamental premise that such services could command substantial fees. The real test came when Tyler arrived for dinner with his girlfriend Sarah, a nurse at the regional medical center. Tyler had apparently told Sarah about my success, because she immediately began asking sophisticated questions about entrepreneurship, technology trends, and the challenges of scaling a service business nationally. I've been reading about digital marketing since Tyler told me about your company, Sarah said. It seems like every business needs these services now, but most small-town companies don't know where to start. How do you find clients in markets where people haven't heard of your company? Her question demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking that David had never encouraged in anyone around him. Sarah understood that success in the modern economy required different skills and strategies than traditional business models, and she was curious about how those strategies actually worked in practice. That's the challenge we're solving with our national expansion, I explained. Instead of relying on personal relationships and local referrals, we're building systems that can identify businesses that need our services and demonstrate value quickly enough to earn their trust remotely. The conversation continued for 30 minutes, with Sarah asking increasingly sophisticated questions about customer acquisition, service delivery, and competitive differentiation. Tyler listened with obvious pride in his girlfriend's intelligence, but also with visible frustration about his own limited understanding of business concepts that were clearly important for future economic opportunities. David's discomfort during this conversation was palpable. His daughter-in-law was demonstrating exactly the kind of intellectual curiosity and strategic thinking that he had discouraged in both Tyler and me. But while he had succeeded in limiting Tyler's educational and career development, he had failed to prevent me from pursuing opportunities that had led to extraordinary success. The moment of reckoning came after dinner, when my mother announced that she had something special to share with the extended family who would be arriving the next day. "Natalie has some news about her company that I think everyone should hear," she said, looking at me with a mixture of pride and anticipation. "What kind of news?" David asked warily. I had been preparing for this moment since accepting the venture capital investment 2 weeks earlier. The story of Harper Digital Solutions' growth from a one-person consultancy to a nationally expanding technology company would force David to confront not just the success of my original business model, but its evolution into something beyond his capacity to dismiss or minimize. Last month, Harper Digital Solutions received an investment offer from a venture capital firm in New York, I began. They offered $25 million for a 40% stake in the company, which values the business at over $62 million total. The silence that followed was complete. Even Sarah, who had been asking intelligent questions about business strategy, seemed stunned by the magnitude of the numbers I had shared. $25 million. Tyler repeated slowly. "People actually gave you $25 million. They didn't give it to me," I clarified. "They invested it in exchange for partial ownership of a company that they believe can become much more valuable over the next 5 years. Harper Digital Solutions is expanding to 6 new cities, hiring 200 additional employees, and developing technology that could serve tens of thousands of small businesses nationally." David's face had gone completely pale. For 8 years, he had clung to the belief that my business success was modest and possibly temporary. The venture capital investment represented validation from sophisticated financial professionals that Harper Digital Solutions was not just successful, but positioned for extraordinary growth. "I don't understand," David said quietly. "How does helping small businesses with websites become worth $60 million? The question revealed the depth of his confusion about modern economic principles. He was still thinking in terms of direct service provision rather than scalable technology systems, local markets rather than national opportunities, and traditional business models rather than platform-based approaches that could serve thousands of clients simultaneously. "Because we're not just helping individual businesses anymore," I explained. "We've developed software and systems that can improve digital marketing for any small business in the country, regardless of their industry or location. Instead of me personally managing campaigns for a dozen local clients, we can now serve hundreds or thousands of clients using automated processes and scalable technology." "But software isn't real," David protested. "It's just computer programs. How can computer programs be worth millions of dollars?" His question illustrated exactly the kind of thinking that had led him to dismiss my ambitions 8 years earlier. David understood value in terms of physical objects and manual labor, but he couldn't grasp how intellectual property, technological systems, and scalable processes could create enormous economic value. "David's software runs the modern economy," I said patiently. "The banking system, telecommunications networks, transportation logistics, inventory management, customer service systems, almost everything that makes modern business possible depends on computer programs. Companies that build valuable software can serve millions of customers simultaneously, which creates revenue potential that far exceeds traditional service businesses." Tyler had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement. "Dad, this is what I was trying to tell you about automotive technology. Modern cars are basically computers with wheels and engines. The diagnostic systems, fuel injection management, safety features, entertainment systems, they're all software. Understanding how those systems work is becoming more important than traditional mechanical skills." The parallel was perfect. Just as I had built value by understanding digital marketing technology that David couldn't grasp, Tyler could build value by mastering automotive technology that represented the future of the industry David worked in. But recognizing this opportunity would require David to acknowledge that his understanding of his own industry was becoming outdated. "So you're saying that everything I know about fixing cars is worthless?" David asked, his voice carrying 8 years of accumulated frustration and confusion. "Not worthless," Tyler replied carefully, "but incomplete. The mechanical skills are still important, but they're not sufficient anymore. Customers expect us to understand the computer systems too, and those systems are getting more complex every year. The conversation was forcing David to confront the possibility that his resistance to technological change had limited not just my opportunities but Tyler's as well. The same attitudes that had led him to dismiss my business ambitions as unrealistic had also prevented him from encouraging his son to develop skills that were increasingly valuable in the automotive industry. Sarah, who had been listening quietly, asked the question that cut to the heart of David's psychological dilemma. Mr. Brennan, what would have happened if you had supported Natalie's interests in business and technology when she was in high school? If you had encouraged her to pursue that entrepreneurship program instead of telling her it was a waste of time? The question hung in the air like an indictment. David was being asked to imagine an alternative history where his family had benefited from my success rather than opposing it, where his encouragement had accelerated my development rather than forcing me to overcome his skepticism. I was trying to protect her from disappointment, David said defensively. Kids from Cedar Falls don't become millionaire business owners. I thought it was better for her to have realistic expectations about what was possible. But your expectations weren't realistic, I said quietly. They were just limited. You mistook your own lack of imagination for practical wisdom, and you confused your fear of change with responsible parenting. The opportunities were real, but you couldn't see them because they didn't fit your preconceptions about how success happens. The words were direct but not cruel. I wasn't trying to humiliate David, but I needed him to understand that his worldview had been fundamentally flawed rather than merely outdated. His resistance to my ambitions hadn't been based on superior knowledge or experience. It had been based on assumptions that were demonstrably wrong. So what happens now? My mother asked, with the investment money and the national expansion. Now we find out whether Harper Digital Solutions can become the kind of company that changes how an entire industry operates, I said. We'll be competing with established agencies that have more resources and better brand recognition, but we'll also be serving markets that they've ignored and solving problems that they haven't addressed effectively. And if it works, Harper Digital Solutions becomes a permanent part of the American business landscape. Small businesses across the country get access to sophisticated marketing services that help them compete more effectively. Our employees build careers that weren't possible before we created these opportunities. And I get to prove that intelligence and determination can overcome any circumstantial disadvantage, regardless of where you start or who believes in your potential. The last comment was directed specifically at David, though I didn't look at him while speaking. 8 years earlier, he had been confident that my circumstances and background predetermined my prospects for success. Now he was confronting evidence that those limitations had existed primarily in his imagination rather than in economic reality. The evening ended with tentative plans for the extended family gathering the next day, where aunts, uncles, and cousins would learn about the venture capital investment and national expansion plans. David retreated to his workshop in the garage, probably seeking familiar surroundings where his expertise was still relevant and unquestioned. But I knew that the psychological process that had begun with the Forbes recognition would continue regardless of David's attempts to avoid confronting its implications. Every conversation about my success, every mention of the investment money, every discussion of the national expansion would remind him that his confident predictions about my future had been completely wrong. The girl who would never amount to anything had just announced plans to build a company that could serve tens of thousands of clients and employ hundreds of people across multiple states. The transformation wasn't just personal anymore, it was becoming institutional and permanent. Tomorrow would bring the extended family gathering, where cousins who had witnessed David's dismissive treatment of my ambitions would learn about the venture capital investment and the national expansion plans. The conversation would spread throughout Cedar Falls, reaching everyone who had heard David's confident predictions about my inevitable failure. But the real reckoning wouldn't come from public recognition of his misjudgment. It would come from his private acknowledgement that the economic principles he had thought he understood were actually beyond his comprehension, and that the stepdaughter he had tried to limit had possessed insights about business and technology that he had been too ignorant to recognize. The boy from Cedar Falls who had inherited a garage and assumed that his understanding of work and value was complete was about to learn that the modern economy operated according to rules that made his traditional expertise increasingly irrelevant. And the girl he had dismissed as a naive dreamer was about to teach him exactly how much the world had changed while he wasn't paying attention. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of sharp winter sunlight that made Cedar Falls look almost picturesque. The extended family began gathering around noon, filling my mother's house with voices and laughter that I hadn't heard in years. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had watched me grow up, who had witnessed David's confident dismissals of my ambitions, were now meeting the stepdaughter who had proven him catastrophically wrong. Uncle Robert, David's older brother, was the first to broach the subject that everyone was thinking about. He pulled me aside while others were busy with dinner preparations, his expression mixing curiosity with genuine amazement. "Natalie, your mom told us about your company and the magazine article," he said quietly. "Is it really true that you've built something worth millions of dollars?" Harper Digital Solutions is valued at $62 million by investors who specialize in evaluating technology companies. I replied simply, "We serve over 800 clients and employ 47 people full-time." The venture capital firm that invested $25 million believes we can grow to serve tens of thousands of businesses nationally. Robert shook his head slowly. "I remember when you were 17, sitting at David's kitchen table talking about business plans and computer programs. David was so certain that you were wasting your time, that you needed to focus on practical career options. I have to admit, I thought he was probably right." His honesty was refreshing. Unlike David, who was still struggling to accept the reality of my success, Robert was acknowledging that their collective assessment of my potential had been completely inaccurate. "What made you think David was right?" I asked. "Experience, I guess," Robert said. "In our generation, kids from places like Cedar Falls who didn't go to college ended up working at the factory or learning a trade. The idea that someone could build $1 million business from scratch, especially using computers, just seemed unrealistic based on everything we had seen." "But you had never actually seen anyone try to build a technology business," I pointed out. "You were basing your assessment on incomplete information about what was possible in the modern economy." "That's exactly right," Robert admitted. "We were using the wrong frame of reference entirely. David kept saying that people like us don't become entrepreneurs, but what he really meant was that people in our family had never tried entrepreneurship seriously." The conversation was interrupted by cousin Jessica, who had driven over from Cleveland with her 2 teenage daughters. Jessica worked as a marketing coordinator for a medical device company, and she had been following Harper Digital Solutions online since the Forbes article was published. "Natalie, I have to tell you something," Jessica said, her voice filled with excitement. "I've been studying your company's website and case studies for my own job. The strategies you've developed for small business marketing are being adopted by companies much larger than your typical clients. You're influencing how the entire industry thinks about digital customer acquisition." Her observation highlighted something I had been too close to my own work to recognize fully. Harper Digital Solutions wasn't just serving small businesses, it was developing methodologies and technologies that were being studied and copied by larger companies throughout the marketing industry. "That's the point of the venture capital investment," I explained. "We're not just growing to serve more clients, we're scaling to become the definitive platform for small business digital marketing. Instead of competing with established agencies, we're creating a new category of service that makes traditional approaches obsolete." David had been listening to this conversation from across the room, his expression growing more troubled with each detail about the scope and impact of my business. The extended family gathering was forcing him to confront not just my individual success, but its recognition and validation by people whose expertise he couldn't question. The breaking point came when Tyler announced his own news to the family. He had been accepted into a 2-year automotive technology program at a community college in Cleveland, with financial assistance from a scholarship fund that supported career transitions for working adults. "I've decided to learn about computer diagnostics, hybrid engine systems, and autonomous vehicle technology," Tyler said. "The automotive industry is changing rapidly, and I want to be prepared for the opportunities that are coming rather than being left behind by them." David's face went completely white. His son's decision represented a direct rejection of the traditional approaches that had defined David's career and worldview. More importantly, it demonstrated that Tyler had been influenced by my example of pursuing education and opportunities that David had dismissed as unrealistic. "You're giving up a steady job at the garage to go back to school?" David asked, his voice strained. "I'm investing in developing skills that will be valuable for the rest of my career," Tyler corrected. "Dad, in 5 years, most of the repair work in automotive shops will involve computer systems that I don't currently understand. I can either learn those systems now while I'm still young enough to change careers, or I can spend the next 20 years becoming increasingly irrelevant." The parallel to my own decision 8 years earlier was unmistakable. Tyler was choosing education and opportunity over immediate security, long-term strategic thinking over short-term comfort. He was doing exactly what I had done when I left Cedar Falls for Austin, despite family skepticism about the wisdom of pursuing unfamiliar opportunities. Sarah and I have been talking about this for months, Tyler continued. She's going to pursue a nurse practitioner degree, and I'm going to specialize in automotive technology. We're both betting that advanced education and technical skills will create better opportunities than accepting limitations based on our current circumstances. The announcement sent ripples of surprise through the extended family, but also nods of approval from the younger members who understood that economic opportunities were increasingly tied to technological competence. David's worldview wasn't just being challenged by my success anymore, it was being abandoned by his own son. I suppose Natalie convinced you that this was a good idea, David said, his tone carrying 8 years of accumulated resentment. Natalie showed me that it was possible, Tyler replied. But I convinced myself that it was necessary. Dad, the automotive industry that you've worked in for 30 years doesn't exist anymore. The skills that made you successful are still important, but they're not sufficient. I can either adapt to the changes, or be replaced by people who understand both traditional mechanical systems and modern computer technology. The conversation was interrupted by a phone call that I had been expecting. Marcus Rodriguez was calling from Austin with an update about a potential acquisition opportunity that had emerged during the holiday week. A competing agency in California was struggling financially and interested in being acquired by Harper Digital Solutions as part of our national expansion strategy. Natalie, I hate to interrupt your family time, Marcus said, but this opportunity could accelerate our West Coast expansion by 18 months. They have existing client relationships and technology infrastructure that would integrate perfectly with our platform. The call lasted 15 minutes, during which I discussed financial terms, integration challenges, and strategic implications with Marcus while my extended family listened to my side of a business conversation that involved millions of dollars and hundreds of employees. When I hung up, the room was completely silent. Was that about buying another company? Cousin Jessica asked. A potential acquisition that would expand Harper Digital Solutions into the California market, I confirmed. We're evaluating whether purchasing an existing agency would be more efficient than building operations from scratch in Los Angeles and San Francisco. How much does it cost to buy a marketing company? Uncle Robert asked. This particular company would cost approximately $8 million, I said. But the acquisition would come with existing revenue streams, established client relationships, and technology assets that would support our expansion goals. The numbers seemed to stun everyone into silence. $8 million was more money than most people in Cedar Falls would see in multiple lifetimes, but for Harper Digital Solutions, it represented a strategic investment that could accelerate growth and market penetration. David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. $8 million to buy a company. $62 million for your business. $25 million from investors. I don't understand any of this anymore. His confession was complete and devastating. The man who had been so confident about his understanding of work, value, and economic opportunity was acknowledging that the modern economy operated according to principles that were beyond his comprehension. David, the economy has fundamentally changed since you started working, I said gently. The relationship between effort and reward, the sources of competitive advantage, the definition of valuable skills, almost everything that determines success is different now than it was 30 years ago. But how was I supposed to know that? David asked, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice carried genuine vulnerability rather than defensive anger. You weren't supposed to know it automatically, I replied. But when someone in your family showed interest in learning about new technologies and business models, you could have encouraged that curiosity instead of dismissing it. When I tried to explain what I was working on, you could have asked questions instead of insisting that it was unrealistic. The room was completely quiet, except for the sound of David's labored breathing. He was confronting not just the magnitude of his misjudgment about my potential, but the broader implications of his resistance to economic and technological changes that had been reshaping opportunities for decades. I was trying to protect you, David said finally. I thought that encouraging unrealistic dreams would set you up for disappointment and failure. But you never investigated whether the dreams were actually unrealistic, I pointed out. You assumed they were impossible because they were unfamiliar to you. You confused your own limitations with universal laws, and you tried to impose those limitations on people who had different capabilities and opportunities. My mother, who had been listening to this exchange with tears in her eyes, finally spoke. David, we failed her. We failed to support our daughter when she needed us most, and we failed to educate ourselves about the opportunities she was pursuing. But more than that, we failed to trust her judgment about her own potential. Her words carried the weight of 8 years of accumulated regret and recognition. She wasn't just acknowledging that they had been wrong about my prospects, she was accepting responsibility for the active harm they had caused by undermining my confidence and creating additional obstacles to my success. I can't change what happened 8 years ago, David said, his voice breaking slightly. But I need you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished, even if I don't understand how you accomplished it. His acknowledgement was incomplete but genuine. David was admitting that his framework for understanding success and failure had been inadequate, even if he couldn't fully grasp the principles that had enabled my achievements. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you might realize. The extended family gathering continued for several more hours, with conversations that ranged from Tyler's educational plans, to Sarah's career ambitions, to Jessica's questions about digital marketing strategies she could implement at her own job. But the fundamental dynamic had shifted. Instead of being the naive dreamer who had defied family wisdom, I was now the family member whose insights about economic opportunities were being sought and valued. When I prepared to leave Cedar Falls the next morning, David walked me to my rental car. His demeanor was different from any interaction we had ever had, carrying none of the condescension or skepticism that had characterized our relationship for years. Natalie, I have one more question, he said as I loaded my luggage. If you could go back and change how things happened, would you want us to have been more supportive when you were starting out? The question was more complex than he probably realized. The opposition I had faced from David and my mother had been painful and isolating, but it had also forced me to develop psychological capabilities that had proven crucial for entrepreneurial success. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to persist through skepticism and rejection, and to build something meaningful without waiting for external validation. I would have preferred having your support, I said honestly. But I'm not sure I would have developed the same level of determination and self-reliance if the path had been easier. Your opposition taught me that other people's understanding of what's possible is often far too limited, and that lesson has been valuable in every aspect of building Harper Digital Solutions. David nodded slowly, processing the possibility that his attempts to limit my ambitions had inadvertently contributed to my success. So in some strange way, maybe I helped after all. You helped by providing motivation, I confirmed. Every time you told me I would never amount to anything, you gave me additional reason to prove you wrong. Every prediction of failure became fuel for working harder and thinking more strategically. And now you understand that people from Cedar Falls, Ohio, can build nationally significant companies if they're willing to learn systematically and work toward ambitious goals. Tyler understands it too, which is why he's pursuing advanced education instead of accepting limitations based on his current circumstances. The drive back to Cleveland gave me time to reflect on the psychological transformation that had occurred during my Christmas visit home. David's confident predictions about my future had been replaced by confused acknowledgement of achievements he couldn't understand. My mother's passive resistance to my ambitions had evolved into proud recognition of capabilities she had failed to appreciate. And Tyler's acceptance of traditional limitations had given way to strategic planning for technological opportunities. But the most significant change was in my own relationship with the motivation that had driven me for 8 years. The need to prove David wrong about my potential had been satisfied completely and publicly. Harper Digital Solutions was succeeding, not because I needed to demonstrate anything to my stepfather, but because we had built something that created genuine value for thousands of clients across multiple industries. The venture capital investment would enable growth that would dwarf even the current scale of our success. Within 5 years, Harper Digital Solutions could be serving 50,000 small businesses, employing over 1,000 people, and generating hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. We could become the definitive platform for small business digital marketing, influencing how an entire segment of the economy approached customer acquisition and brand development. That vision had nothing to do with family dynamics or personal vindication. It was about building something that would create lasting value for clients, employees, and the broader business community. The girl who would never amount to anything had become someone who could amount to far more than anyone in Cedar Falls had ever imagined possible. The plane lifted off from Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, carrying me back to Austin and the next phase of Harper Digital Solutions expansion. Below, Ohio stretched to the horizon, containing thousands of small towns where young people were being told to accept realistic limitations on their ambitions. But some of those young people, inspired by examples of success that transcended geographical and economic constraints, would choose different paths. They would pursue education and opportunities that their families didn't understand. They would build businesses that served markets their communities had never heard of. They would prove that intelligence and determination could overcome any circumstantial disadvantage, regardless of where they started or who believed in their potential. And they would remember that the people who told them they would never amount to anything had simply confused their own limitations with universal laws, their fear of change with practical wisdom, and their lack of imagination with responsible guidance. The girl from Cedar Falls who would never amount to anything had shown them exactly how much someone could accomplish when they refused to accept other people's definitions of what was possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.